Those of you who are still snowed in on the East Coast, I salute you, and I empathize. Barely escaped myself. A big thanks to Melissa Harris Perry for filling in for me on Friday when I was snowed in. When Pope Benedict XVI announced today that he would resign as Pope, that he would abdicate the papacy, the move was greeted, frankly, with shock that something that has not happened in 600 years is happening right now. But it was also clear immediately that even though nothing like this has happened in 600 years, or 598 years to be exact, the Catholic Church nevertheless had a plan ready to go, even though no pope has resigned his seat since the year 1415. And this resignation announcement today from Pope Benedict was totally unexpected. Despite all of that, there is apparently an agreed-upon protocol for what happens in an instance like this. Once Pope Benedict leaves the Vatican on February 28th, the Church says he will go live for a while in Castel Gandolfo, which is the Pope's summer house in a small town outside of Rome. He will live at that castle while construction work is done on a cloistered monastery inside the Vatican complex. Then when the construction is done, he will move back into the Vatican. And living in that cloistered monastery, provided that papal cloistering is like other kinds of cloistering, I think that means that he will have no contact with the outside world while he lives there. He'll be closed off. In any case, the cardinals will then meet, they say before the end of March, to choose Pope Benedict's successor. And then we will have two living popes, or one living pope and an ex-pope. But there is a plan. Before we get to the drama and the political and theological import of the choosing of the new pope, what is remarkable here, just organizationally, is that there is an agreed-upon and accepted way forward in an instance like this. There is a plan for how this goes, this thing that last happened in the early 1400s. Is this like Plan X, Plan Y? This can't possibly be any plans listed at the beginning of the alphabet, but they have a plan. We have only existed as a country since the late 1700s, which in world historical perspective is not long at all. Compared with the institutions and traditions of the Catholic Church, we as a nation are a spring chicken. But within our own timetable of American history, our national history, one of the most ancient rituals and traditions that we have as a nation is something that will happen tomorrow night. The State of the Union address. The State of the Union is one of those very specific things like the post office or the census that is called for explicitly in the United States Constitution. Article 1 in the Constitution is about the Congress, the legislative branch. Article 2 is about the presidency. Article 3 is the judicial branch. And the part of the Constitution that calls for the State of the Union message is in Article 2, Section 3. It says the president shall from time to time give to the Congress information about the State of the Union. And since it is in the Constitution, we have been doing this from the very beginning. The first one was January 1790, George Washington. He delivered his State of the Union address to Congress. He made his recommendations to them for action. George Washington was, of course, the first president. John Adams was the second president. By the time we got to the third president, Thomas Jefferson, Jefferson thought the whole speech to Congress thing was actually a little showy, made the president too king-like for his taste. And so Jefferson decided to meet this particular constitutional obligation in writing rather than by giving a speech. That tradition held sway for more than 100 years, until 1913, when the speaking tradition of the State of the Union was revived in what was a controversial move at the time by President Woodrow Wilson. So Wilson's innovation was really, I guess, the major innovation in this ancient ritual that we have as a nation, the return to it being delivered in speech form, which happened in 1913. The only other major innovation that we have had over the centuries started in 1966. That's when the party that is not the president's party started giving, in effect, a rebuttal to the State of the Union. The Republicans started it when LBJ was president. They started it in 1966. The top Republican in the House and the top Republican in the Senate, Everett Dirksen and Gerald Ford, they wanted to critique LBJ's State of the Union. So they went on television right after his speech, and they gave a Republican response. They thought it was so successful that first year that the same two Republicans responded to LBJ's speech again the following year. And then apparently drunk with their own success, the third year that they did it, they had 17 Republicans responding to LBJ. 17. When Nixon became president the following year, Democrats had their first chance to do their own party's rebuttal. And in their first response, they had 7 Democrats respond to Nixon. If you get the feeling that it was becoming a little bit of a circus, you are not alone. And the young tradition of the opposite party's response to the State of the Union died after the first couple of years there. Apparently, it died of its own top-heaviness, and it was dead for most of the next decade. Eventually, though, the president getting all that unanswered airtime and attention proved too much for Washington's partisans, and the State of the Union responses started up again after the 1970s. And now it is well established that every year, the party out of power, the party who does not hold the White House, will offer a response. After more than a generation of doing it this way, it feels like almost as much of a tradition as the State of the Union itself. The rebuttal address, a response address from the other party, is carried by all of the networks that carry the State of the Union itself. It's treated with essentially the same gravitas. And to be named as the respondent to the State of the Union for your party, that is considered a real elevation within your party. I mean, you essentially bookend the president's remarks. You alone are responsible for embodying and articulating your own party's coherent, unified alternative to what the country has just heard from the president. Or at least you used to be. Because now, Republicans have come up with yet another innovation for this most ancient American political ritual. They were the first ones who came up with the rebuttal address in 1966. And now, since Barack Obama has been president, they have come up with a new idea. The idea of doing not just a rebuttal to the president's State of the Union address, but also a rebuttal to their own rebuttal. What? Yes. For the 3rd year in a row now, Republicans are rebutting themselves, as well as rebutting the president. What could possibly go wrong? The first year was 2011, when Minnesota Congresswoman and eventual presidential candidate Michelle Bachmann gave not the Republican Party response, but the Tea Party Republican response to the Republican response to President Obama's State of the Union, while making meaningful eye contact with something other than the camera that was pointed at her. That was the first one. The year after that, the Tea Party Republican response to the Republican response to the State of the Union was given by pizza company executive Herman Cain.
And so I say in response, on behalf of the Tea Party and citizen people across this country, with all due respect, Mr. President, some of us are not stupid. The State of the Union is not good.
The Hermanator, making his mark on the Republican Party's new attempted tradition of self-rebutting schismatic State of the Union responses. Lest you think the 2012 election changed anything in Republican Party politics, in case all of the anti-abortion legislation in the states has not been persuasive enough, in case the re-election of party chairman Reince Priebus by acclamation is not persuasive enough, in case the persistent efforts at the state level to make voting harder, even now, in case those efforts have not been persuasive enough, let it be known that nothing at all has changed in Republican Party politics even after the 2012 election. And they are sticking with the idea this year of having not just a Republican Party response to the State of the Union, but a Tea Party Republican response to the Republican response to the State of the Union again. This year, the inheritor of the Michelle Bachmann, Herman Cain legacy will be United States Senator Rand Paul. The official Republican Party response will be delivered by another guy who we are told is a Tea Party senator, Marco Rubio. But Marco Rubio is giving the Republican response, and Rand Paul is giving the Tea Party Republican response to the Republican response. Capiche? It is hard to tell at this point whether or not the Republican Party still has the wherewithal to be annoyed at its own members being this self-serving, whether or not they care. This throws kind of a wrench in the works, right, in terms of the Republican Party's efforts to portray itself as having a coherent, unified, alternate vision to what President Obama is offering. I mean, if you like an alternative vision that is presented after the State of the Union this year, which one do you pick? If you're in the market for a Republican message, which one is being offered? And then how do you demonstrate that you like that message? How do you vote? What do you do? On the other side of the aisle, Democrats in the White House are trying to make the most this year of the attention surrounding the president's speech. They are doing everything they can to use the speech for maximum political effect. The White House has already announced that after the State of the Union, the president will get on the road to push for the policies he unveils in the speech tomorrow night. He will head to Asheville, North Carolina on Wednesday. He will travel to Atlanta on Thursday. He will travel to Chicago on Friday. That's the sort of thing that presidents have done in years past. But this year, in addition, Organizing for Action, which is the group formed out of the Obama campaign, they're organizing watch parties in neighborhoods all around the country to get the president's supporters to watch the speech together. The president himself, immediately after he's finished delivering the State of the Union, he will get on a conference call that night with supporters and with members of Organizing for Action. The president will also participate in what Google is calling a fireside hangout, kind of a riff on the fireside chat. On Thursday afternoon, somewhere between North Carolina and Georgia, he's going to be taking questions on Google+. In terms of invited guests at the State of the Union this year, traditionally the First Lady invites a number of outside guests to sit with her during the speech. It's both an honor in itself, and it is to symbolize some of the proposals the president will discuss in the speech. This year, the First Lady's guests will include Army Staff Sergeant Clinton Romesha, who was awarded the Medal of Honor today for extraordinary valor in one of the deadliest battles in the war in Afghanistan. After attending the funeral this weekend of Hadia Pendleton, the young Chicago honors student who was shot dead in Chicago just a week after she performed as a majorette in the parade honoring the president's inauguration in D.C., just after attending this young woman's funeral this weekend, the First Lady, Michelle Obama, will be hosting her mother, Hadia Pendleton's mother, as one of her guests for the president's speech. Interestingly, a number of the Democratic members of the House, Democratic members of Congress, I should say, both houses, have also announced that they have given tickets to the speech to relatives and friends of people who have been killed by gun violence, including relatives and friends of victims of the Aurora mass shooting, Aurora, Colorado, and the Newtown mass shooting from December, and the Tucson mass shooting. Former Congresswoman Gabby Giffords and her husband will be attending as guests of her replacement in Congress, Ron Barber, who was a Gabby Giffords staffer and who was himself wounded in the Tucson shooting. They will also be guests of Senator John McCain. Gabby Giffords' Political Action Group, the group she formed with her husband, astronaut Mark Kelly, Americans for Responsible Solutions. Americans for Responsible Solutions cut this ad, which is going to be running after the State of the Union, apparently on Fox and MSNBC and CNN.
We have a problem where we shop, where we pray, where our children go to school. But there are solutions we can agree on. Even gun owners like us. Take it from me. Congress must act. Let's get this done.
In addition to running after the State of the Union tomorrow night on cable networks, that ad is scheduled to air on local broadcast TV in Washington, D.C. According to the group that produced the ad, they're also planning on running this in local media markets, reaching the constituents of all four top congressional leaders from both houses and both parties. So that's Mitch McConnell, Harry Reid, Nancy Pelosi, and John Boehner. In response, I think, to the number of Democrats and the First Lady bringing victims of gun violence with them as guests to the State of the Union this year to highlight that issue, one Republican member of Congress this year has decided to do his part to advance the serious consideration of gun violence and lawful gun ownership in America by inviting as his guest for the State of the Union this gentleman.
Hey, Obama, you might want to suck on one of these, you punk! You don't get that. Obama, he's a piece of and I told him to suck on my machine gun. Let's hear it for him. And then I was in New York. I said, hey, Hillary, you might want to ride one of these into the sunset, you worthless.
Mr. Ted Nugent is a musician. I believe he's still mostly known for Cat Scratch Fever, but I could be wrong. He was investigated by the Secret Service last year after telling an NRA convention in April of 2012, quote, if Barack Obama is elected, I'll either be dead or in jail this time next year. Texas Congressman Steve Stockman has invited Ted Nugent to be his guest for the State of the Union. But if you think about what he got in trouble for with the Secret Service last year, Barack Obama's elected, I'll either be dead or in jail by this time next year. If you think about that, given that it's February, that means we only have 2 months left of Ted Nugent. By his own account. Maybe one of those nights tomorrow will be in Washington at the State of the Union, courtesy of a Republican congressman who thought it was a good idea to invite him. The State of the Union is always an amazing and historic night in American politics. It is one of our oldest and I think best civic rituals as a nation. But this year it's going to be even more of a hoot than usual.
Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. We are for free education. We do not give up. Expect surprises. Subscribe.